his name was Gene Huff, the appraiser, and we were talking about UFOs, and Bob Lazar was sitting there rolling his eyes, and he said, you guys are nuts. He said, I worked at Los Alamos. If there'd have been anything secret like that, I would have known. And, I've heard that so many times. It's incredibly ignorant people that say, I would have known. Anyway, during the rest of the summer, we gave Bob enough information that he could check with his friends that still worked at Los Alamos to find out that, something's going on because they do know a lot of stuff. So he called up Dr. Teller, who he'd met at Los Alamos, and said he wanted to re-enter the scientific field. And Teller said, do you want to work with me at Livermore here in California, or do you want to work in Nevada? Bob said, I want to work at Area 51. Teller said, okay, let me get back with you. So this was in October of '88, and Bob then, over the next several weeks, got 3 interviews. And he'd go down to EG&G, which is Edgerton, Germershausen, and Greer, and there was a panel, and they interviewed him, and he aced all of the interviews. I mean, he was just right up with everything they wanted to know, as far as scientific and where he'd been and what he'd studied in college and all that kind of stuff. The second interview was, their first question was, what's your relationship with John Lear, and, what else do you do with John? And so there was definitely interest there. He used to come over in the evening, we'd bullshit about what was going on. He said, I saw a disc today. And I said, what? I saw a disc. I said, theirs or ours? He said, theirs. I said, you went to Area 51? He said, yep. And I said, well, what are you doing here? I said, they followed you. Why don't you just work for a while, find out what's going on, and then talk about it? He said, John, you've taken so much crap over the past few years. He said, I wanted to tell you it's true. I was in it. I touched it. It's not ours. It's from, billions of light years away or wherever. And so that's how I met Bob. And he worked for the next few months. And he'd tell us when the test flights were going to be, always on a Wednesday night. And we'd drive out there and take photos or videos and stuff. One of the times we got caught, and that's when the security guards stopped us within the test site. We were still on BLM land. It was legal. But they said, we can make it awful difficult for you if you stay here. So we left and got out on the highway, and that's when the Lincoln County Sheriff stopped us. Get out of the car, hands up, all that stuff. They wanted to know 2 things. Why are there 4 people in this car, or 5 people now, and there's only 4 when the security stops you, and Bob had run out in the desert. Then the other thing was, where's the 9mm? Because Bob had said he got the 9mm. After about an hour, the sheriff, and I used to know his name real well, he said, I don't know why I've been told this, but I've been told to let you guys go and not to say anything more. So we drove home, and early next morning is when Dennis Mariana, the guy that Bob worked for, said, Bob, don't go to the airplane. I'm going to pick you up. We're going to go up to Indian Springs. And Indian Springs is now Creech Air Force Base, and that's where the center for all test site security activities are. And they took him there, took him out of the car with a gun in his ear and said, now, Bob, when we gave you this clearance, it didn't mean you were supposed to take all your friends and tell them about the flying saucers. So at that time, Bob's wife was having an affair with her flight instructor, which Bob didn't know about, but which they knew about because they were listening. All his phones, everything was tapped. My house, Bob's house, Gene's house, everything. So they said, when you get your life straightened out, you're welcome to come back. And Bob said the reason he never went back was the fact that the last 2 trips he made up to Area 51, he could remember getting on the 737, to go to Groom Lake and getting off, but nothing in between. No working, no what he did, none of that. So that bothered him. He wanted to know what he was going to be working on, but their mind control is so far advanced now. I know that my father was the prime contractor for anti-gravity in 1952, and I've got the papers on that, Unfortunately for him, he couldn't keep his mouth shut, and he went down to Bogota in 1953 and started talking about UFOs. So as close as he was, they kicked him out of the program, but Lear Incorporated still kept with that anti-grav stuff, and I think that was totally complete by 1956, which means we had saucers then, the whole enchilada by then. Kwajalein is where all the secret stuff goes. All those launches are out in the South Pacific, and Kwajalein Island, the Ronald Reagan, they launch, probably every other day. There's probably 1,000 astronauts, current and qualified, that go up all the time. So I was working ATS, above top secret, or whatever it was, and we were talking about the discrepancies with the shuttle going up and taking 48 hours to get to the ISS when it only took the Russians an hour. And then the same thing when they disengaged from the ISS. Why did it take them over 48 hours to come back? And of course what they were doing is, and what tipped me off is, one of the videos they had when the shuttle got there, they opened the door and it's only half full. So what they were doing is taking as much stuff that they could for the astronauts that were doing all the secret stuff. And of course the things they had to have, like fruit and perishables and stuff, and that had to go up and be unloaded. And then the Russians would always launch the same day that the shuttle launched, and that stuff that they had in their rocket would be transferred to the shuttle. And when it came back down, the reason it took them 2 days is they were going to all the different space stations and dropping all the stuff off that the Russians had given. Which brings me to the Cold War. I think that was all bullshit. There was never any Cold War. We've always been allied with the Russians. I always tell this story about the Area 51. They hired a security guard when they were first cranking up, and he was supposed to sit at one of these hallway intersections. One of the praying mantises comes walking down like this, and the guard looks at him and has a heart attack and dies. So what they did is they were more careful now. They give them, over a period of 3 or 4 weeks, they flash different photos, so that they don't get so scared when one of these things walks down the hallway, Joe Resnick was telling me he was working in a laboratory with a reptilian, and he said they looked just like us, and the only difference was they would close the inner eyelid every once in a while, and it would shock him every time they did that. They had 2 sets of eyelids. Our star system, with the sun and allegedly the 9 planets, there's really 40 planets, and many of them are hidden so that we can't see them for various reasons, and they want to keep that all secret. But there is so much going on between all of the 40 planets, their moons, their satellites. Carl Sagan would say, yeah, well, there's probably aliens, but they're millions of years away. No, they aren't. They're right on Earth. Probably 25% of the population, Earth's population, is aliens. Of course, we're aliens too, but the moon is artificial. The 2 Russians that wrote the book about the being a spacecraft, they were right on. It was. And there's all kinds of stuff inside the moon, and it's artificial. To monitor us about what's going on, they, the humans that live there are completely separate with the Greys that have the laboratories up there. I estimate there's probably 250 million people on the moon right now. They're not humans like us, but humans from somewhere else. And, you know, we used to think that the Greys would pick up 1 in 10. No, they pick up everybody. And they do it all the time, you know, and they give them updated programs and things like that. And fantastic laboratories they have up there. And we figure there's 7 billion people on Earth. That's a lot of trips. And it's said that if they ever showed themselves without the cloaking, the sky would be black all day long with the ships going back and forth, taking all the different people back and forth and doing all the tests and stuff.